It is good to see everyone again, and I hope you all are enjoying the SMM Digital 2021. After that great Speakers Corner session, it is now time to move forward with new insights in digitalization in the maritime industry and its impacts on environment, safety, and business, a theme that I am sure you all have dealt with in the past few years. CIMAC, the International Council on Combustion Engines, is a nonprofit association and a global platform for the large engine industry consisting of members from 27 countries worldwide. CIMAC aims to bring the industry together, promoting pre-competitive cooperation for the spread and scalability of innovation in the sector. The CIMAC Circle is a technical panel discussion aimed at tackling an important topic affecting the industry today. It will bring together a panel of experts from the different stakeholders involved. CIMAC will discuss the important issues that the entire industry is challenged with, the onset of digitalization in the maritime industry and its impact on the environment, safeties, and business. The session will start with a short introduction from the chair, Captain Eero Lehtovaara, Chair, CIMAC Digitalization Strategy Group. He will be joined by a panel of distinguished experts. We are also looking forward to receiving a keynote from Bud Dar from the MSC Group, representing the voice of the ship owners operators. After touching upon the subsequent impact of digitalization with views from the different stakeholders, the panel will explore requirements on legislation forced by the development and digitalization and digital solutions. One of the key questions will deal with effective communication and mutual understanding between the legislators and the industry, such that we have a holistic view on practical safety imperatives for complex digital systems and solutions going forward. Over to you, Captain Eero Lehtovaara.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CIMAC Circle at SMM Digital 2021. Extraordinary times to have SMM digital this way. And we're going to talk about digitalization today, what it is, what it means for the environment, what it means for the business, and also what it means for safety. With us, and my name is Eero Lehtovaara. I work for ABB Marine and Ports, and I'm also chairing the CIMAC Industry Strategy Group. And with us, I have today Bud Dar from MSC, and he's going to give us the keynote today. We also have Jakob Teiling from the European Commission. We have Commander Nicholas Tabori from the US Coast Guard, and Erik Tved from the Danish Maritime Authority. Before we go into the actual topic of today, it's really the CIMAC Circle is to represent and try to focus on behalf of CIMAC, which is the CIMAC is an abbreviation from French, and quite shortly, it is about internal combustion engines. But lately, we also see within CIMAC that we need to approach the larger community and the larger parts of the technology. One part being of that we might touch upon today is also that we see the ship as a system, and we need to see the ship as a system going forward. But instead of talking about these things, I think that we will start by giving Bud from MSC the word to give us a little bit of a keynote, a little bit setting the scene and the tone for this discussion going forward. So, Bud, please go ahead.
I'd rather not think of it as a keynote, but more as the latter, that I maybe offer you some comments from a ship owner's perspective that may help set the tone for the rest of the discussion. So I'm the Executive Vice President for Maritime Policy and Government Affairs at the MSC Group based in Geneva, Switzerland. And for those who may not know much about our company, we are the second largest container carrier in the world with about 560 container ships on the water at any one time in our network. We're the third largest cruise line in the world with MSC Cruises and a fleet of 17 very modern cruise ships with a significant number still on order. We have 10 more on the order books coming, so we're also very rapidly growing in that business. We also have 12 ocean-going ferries through our GNV subsidiary in the Mediterranean, and we also operate a couple of dozen high-speed craft in the Mediterranean as passenger ferries as well. So those of you who've maybe visited the beautiful island of Capri near Naples, you've almost certainly been on one of our vessels, whether you knew it or not. And on the intermodal side, we are also the owner or joint owner and operator of around 51 container terminals at any given time, as well as 3 million or so containers and 5,000 trucks. And we're also actually a very large share of the privately operated railway system in Europe as well. So I only say that because I think we provide a bit of a microcosm of the broader maritime industry and the intermodal component of it, especially. And so the types of things that we're thinking of as a maritime community, one way or another, we pretty much have those same conversations and discussions inside of our company because of the diversity that we have. One other unique characteristic of our company is it is family founded and family owned even today, and Mr. Aponte that founded the company with his wife in 1970 still directly involved in all the decision making, which is quite an interesting dynamic where you really do have family ownership and active part in the leadership of the company day to day and all that historical knowledge that's never left. So I'll start by saying with the phrase digitalization, I bristle a little bit at it, and I know it's in our title here, but the only reason why is not that I'm afraid of it or think that it's a bad thing at all, but it tends to be kind of if you remember, there was a craze many years ago when I was a kid of a pet rock and where it could be whatever you wanted it to be. And sometimes I think the phrase digitalization is used as kind of the pet rock of terms of the day. It kind of is in the eyes of the beholder of exactly what it means or exactly how it's applied or how it might be regulated. But I tend to think of it more as a bundle of electronic tools and systems that may be available to us to help us run the shipping component of our industry. And no matter what you want to call it, we're still essentially talking about a group of tools to help us be successful. And how do I mean successful? I think in particular, three things that jump to mind is to help us operate the shipping industry in our respective fleets in a safe, sustainable, and efficient manner. And by efficiency, I mean also with both senses of energy efficient or cost efficient, but also commercially efficient. And we're looking for ways all the time to integrate these technologies into the systems, not only that are behind the scenes as to how we actually operate, but also how we interface with our customers and with our partners in the various port communities and maritime community overall. So, a couple of key points I'd like to emphasize is that I think, as with any emerging technology, whether you're talking about a system or a particular device, I think it's really important that that be driven by user demand. It sometimes is very counterproductive to promote or adopt or, from a regulator's perspective, even require a piece of technology if it's not solving a particular need. Now, some of us, particularly on the ship owner end, need to be educated as to what need is it that could be solved through this technology. But I think it really does need to start with a genuine demand signal from the ship owners to come together in a way that's both widely accepted and also very effective at what it's trying to do. The second thing, so I think it's really important that it be fit for its purpose. I'll give you an example. As we have advanced with a rapidly evolving world over the last couple of decades of navigation systems, it's been a challenge at times, either from a standardization perspective or with basic levels of understanding of the crew, to make sure that you haven't put a system on board that exceeds the ability of the crew to actually utilize it to its potential. And when you get a mismatch between the human part and the hardware part, you can also create a situation that maybe is actually somewhat dangerous. So I think it's pretty important that we think how we can integrate these new technologies in a way that doesn't get in front of the pace that we have trained and retained our operators so that they can actually use those systems properly and get the value out of them that we think we're purchasing when we put them on board. And I think that goes for a piece of software as much as it goes for a piece of hardware. Either way, it's about system integration and how it interacts with the human operators because unlike some that may take a little bit different view on it. I personally think human operators are going to remain front and center, very important part of how we operate ships for a very long time to come. But the right sort of electronic technologies can help not only ease their workload, but make them more effective, more safe, more sustainable, and more efficient. The third key point that I'll make is any one of these types of components or systems that we put on board has to be secure and reliable. I think we're seeing a higher and higher level of incidence of attacks externally with a malicious intent on the shipping industry and through electronic systems. And as everything becomes more interconnected through the Internet of Things and other mechanisms, I think we have to be mindful at all of those potential vulnerability points that we have to make sure are secure from potential malicious actors. But whether or not it's a malicious attack, if we have become reliant on an electronic system, it has to be reliable in the sense that it will function when we need it to function. And when it doesn't, we have actually processes in place where our operators can identify it's not functioning properly and then know exactly how to not only recognize it, but then move in and take the correct intervention to perform the task, whatever it might be, in an equally safe manner. So I think reliability inherently is important, but also making sure that the contingency planning and training is in place so that should the redundancy fail in these systems, we've got the human part that can come back in and still has the skill set that's required and the recognition to make sure that we stay operating in the manner that we need to operate, or at least put the ship in a safe condition until it can be rectified. I think there have been some really good examples that we have experience with in our company. I'd like to talk briefly about a couple of them. One is the Digital Container Shipping Association, I think has done some excellent work at trying to build as a foundation common communication protocols between electronic systems because you really have no hope of building an integrated use of these things if you haven't at least started with a way where systems can talk together. We can use them for different purposes and we can use them in different manners, but if they can't communicate with each other, we can't use them together. So I think that's building some important protocols within the container sector and the intermodal sector that will pay off really well in the longer term. And I think that work, which is collaborative between a variety of different shipping interests and their partners, is really going to be useful for the long term. Another example is just-in-time arrivals or optimizing port calls. And if you can share the information in real time and accurately and through common protocols of the port end of our network of how we're operating, we can greatly improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of how we actually operate our fleets to meet that. So if you look as an example right now, LA Long Beach on any given day, it's shocking to me, but you might find 30 or 5 or 40 ships at anchor, container ships at anchor, waiting to get in and go to berth. Wouldn't it be great if we could have had all those ships sail slower, emit less CO2 and other pollutants into the atmosphere? Also, obviously, less fuel consumption, so it's operating more efficiently rather than to hurry up and get to a place that's not ready for them. So, we've done some trial projects working through uh, fellow members of the industry through the Global Industry Alliance that the IMO has helped facilitate, where we've shown that there's some real benefit to be had there, even for companies like ours that think they do operate their networks very efficiently. We've learned we can do better and we will. And then the last of the three examples I'll give is fleet monitoring, particularly particularly on performance and fuel efficiency. We found that by upgrading those systems, which is easier when you have electronic controlled engines, but there's some possibilities otherwise too, we were able to greatly improve the ability to monitor more parameters more frequently, more effectively, and actually optimize the use of the ships and identify at what points they need things like additional hull cleaning or coating maintenance of another kind, or evaluate how successful we've been at particular interventions, and actually be able to do that with less people ashore per ship. I think there's great opportunities ahead by applying these technologies, but I just offer my comments as maybe a starting point for discussion from my perspective alone. Certainly others may have different views, but I think to unlock the maximum potential, I think a lot of the things that I said really need to be taken into account. I look forward to the discussion, and it's really been my pleasure to lead things off today. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Bud. A very, very good start. There's a couple of things that I immediately kind of took off that is that it's equally an opportunity for us to do great things, but there's a built-in risk also if we do things not really the way we should do, and unlocking opportunities. I especially like that because in my mind, digitalization is about how to get into using the information that the ships are making available. So thank you very much. I think that we all share your kind of, let's say, problem with digitalization. What is it? What is it that we're talking about? And just for the sake of the discussion, we could spread that discussion as wide as possible, but in my mind, we'll keep it closer to the ships and ship operations. But if we're really looking at digitalization, so if let's ask Jakob and the kind of the commission, and from my point of view, from the regulators, what is digitalization? How do you see digitalization as a word, and what is it that we're talking about?
Well, thank you very much, Eero, and also Bud for a very interesting introduction to this, and thank you for that question. It would appear to be an easy question, but actually it isn't, and the answer isn't so easy. I actually think it's today used in very many different ways. It's almost constructive ambiguity around it. But give you a little bit of the perspective that I'm working on and in the Commission and how we try to see digitalization. It's certainly not an end. It's a mean towards a target. Digitalization is, in a way, nothing new in shipping, but it's been accelerated, partly because of the discussion on autonomous and partly because of the situation we are in to have resilience in the maritime sector, still have vessels sailing under peculiar circumstances. But digitalization for us is what Bud is saying, in that we need all, whether it is the industry, whether it is the class society that may work for the ship owner, in equal terms may work for a flag state. So it's equally interesting for those that are involved in actually enabling the vessel to sail in the first place, issuing the certificates. It's also for the enforcement side, of course, where I come from, mostly on the say, port state control or flag state control. But it doesn't mean that it's contradicting. I'll give you an example of how we have been trying to use digitalization already. For instance, in sharing information on port state control and having that available, the history and the previous inspection, and possibly information from class in terms of outstanding issues that could be important for the preparation of a port state control officer before the vessel comes alongside. And that can be an increase in efficiency, meaning for both. The port state control officer can spend less time on board, but more focused. That means that it's a quicker turnaround time, which is normally in the interest of the ship owner. They earn money when they sail. And we are not reducing anybody's turf, as it were. We keep and maintain the safety approach and levels, and the ship owner should be pleased with a more efficient handling of the vessel. It's part and parcel of their daily life. They may be subject to an inspection of some sort. And the same goes actually for if it's a flag state inspection or a class survey or similar. And now we are building on this. So what I'm saying is that sort of helps both sides. That's a way how we are trying to use digitalization towards something, a more efficient handling of the vessel from a regulatory point of view, an enforcement point of view. And now we are trying to build on this, for instance, to also e-certificate, e-registries, flags between parties involved. Information is available already in the background. Incoterms, and there is no bridge to go up on and take out a file and start to look at the certificates. Of course, that's a prerequisite. That we think is fine, and I pick up on something that Bart said that, which I do this, and that is that it has to all be interoperable. We have to be able to share the information. Otherwise, we are back to square one. You may be able to do it in a closed circuit, but not any further. So that becomes a key. Whether that is regulation or standardization, we can discuss later on in the panel. And if we can do this with e-certificates and through e-registers, why couldn't we go in and do, I'm using the word e-logbooks a little bit carelessly, but I guess you follow what I mean. If you can have more to real-time monitoring, that is important for the owner and for their purposes, commercial purposes. We'll come into the greening later on. It's important for a society that is involved with the vessel supporting the owner and the flag state. And it could be important, the flag state or port state, to know with the ultimate aim of saying, listen, this vessel is shipshape. We don't spend time on her. Let her sail. Let her go about her business. Let her earn money. By the way, we have nothing against that as long as it's done within the safety parameters and what we have all agreed to do. And at the same time then spend a focus on if there are still those out there that try to cut corners and say, look here, you have an issue. We want to look at you, and we have already most of the data, so we can be efficient, but we want you really on standby to tell us what are you going to do about this. And in that way, we can, we have been focusing a long time on punishing non-compliance, but maybe through digitalization, we can move a step towards rewarding compliance. Many more ship owners are quality-minded than are not. And why should we not give them an advantage? But I think I'm going maybe too far ahead already here. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jakob. So you're kind of on the same track as Bud was, that by using the available information in digital format, that we will be able to improve operational efficiency quite a lot. So it's kind of an opportunity waiting to get unlocked. Great insight, thank you. What about you, Erik? Jakob mentioned flag states a few times. You're representing a flag state. How do you see digitalization, or how would you kind of define that?
Well, in my world, this is a really difficult question, because just as Jakob and also Bud said, digitalization means different things to different people. In some cases, it's about blockchain-based logistics systems. In other cases, and that's close to this forum, the electronic governor of a large diesel engine. These are both representatives of digitalized tools and different digitalized things that make things work in our industry. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is when we discuss it, is to agree. Well, we are all in the same library, but we need to at least get to the same shelf and look at some of the same books in order to have a meaningful debates on this. And to my point, well, as a flag state, we've got two arms really, or two legs to stand on. One is we want to have the ships to sail under our flag, to trade, to make money. The other leg, which is really our raison d'etre from the old days and still is today, is we need to have this done in a safe way that doesn't harm the environment, and we need to ensure that the seafarers come ashore just as fit and just both psychologically and physically as when they went out to sea. And therefore, this has so many implications. It's a new way of working. It has been in the making for at least 50 years, but I think it's only now we are coming to grips with how much this influences our daily work. I think this COVID crisis, with some of us working from home and lots of seafarers not being able to go home, really has emphasized how much the industry has changed already due to digitalization. And to focus down on one thing, seen from a flag state perspective, that was the only word that really wasn't used by Bud. This is the word resilient. I think we like very much to have everything being resilient. And I looked the word up in the Oxford Dictionary. It means the ability to bounce back after a crisis. And that means that the logistics systems haven't been hacked or just having been going through a crisis due to either no trade or too much trade, is also able to cope, bounce back and work. And likewise, the electronic governor, it needs to not only bounce back and work when it has been, well, you're in a bad weather, you have a racing engine, it controls the engine speed. But it also needs to be able to withstand malicious attacks. Because if you really want to ruin a ship, the electronic governor, that would be my prime target, because it would make my engine, destroy itself. And therefore, I think we need to think about how we're making all of these different kinds of systems resilient. And that gives a whole new debate. I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think that you came into what commonly is spoken about as cybersecurity. Resilience, I like it. It is really what is required in order to make systems safe. You also mentioned kind of health issues. Do you see that the digitalization will impact the crews on board, and by that I by no mean I'm not talking about taking away crews, but that for them to start working in a different way. How do you see, Eric, that as what you said in regards of crew and crew health?
Well, we already have it. We do have an enormous amount of digital system on board in ships today. Some of them we just don't realize because we look at them as black boxes. And I think one of the challenges are really both for the crew on board and the shoreside organization is starting to look at the ship as a system. You said that in the introduction. And many times, especially having what we call simple ships, bulk carriers and so on, you still have the tradition. You buy a steel box, put an engine in it by the shipyard, you buy a lot of components and you more or less throw it in and hope it will work, and the crew makes it work. But many of these things, especially some of the advanced ships, I guess for the cruise ships, the most advanced things are really the management system. You're managing 6,000 passengers for the big ones. That's really a tremendous and very important job. So crew are already working in a digitalized world. Crew already rely upon, and now in the COVID crisis, staying on board far longer than they were supposed to. This is a lifeline to home. So I think we're already there, but we need to accept it into the way we operate our system, the way we manage our system, the way we maintain our ships, because it's a fact of life. It's there. And hopefully, I'm looking to somebody like you, Aero, who are on the supplier side, we get this stuff more integrated. And we get the training of the crew members to be more focused on not only having a black box, but understanding the boxes, and it's particularly understanding how they work together. And I think my big challenge really in very many cases is not the crew on board. It's the shoreside support organization who many times are not really aware of how digitalized the ships has already become. And they just say, well, we got this piece of control scatter system from ABB. 25 years old. It's a black box. In the old day, we just bought a black box. We repaired it. There was some leakage of hydraulics and air and so on. We repaired it. It stayed the lifetime of the ship. That's not the world today. Today, you may go to 2 or 3 generations of scatter system in the lifetime of a more complex ships. And that's some of the things we still have to work with. So I think training and education of the shore side is actually more challenging than the crews. I think many of the crews I met, they are really coping and they are up to the beat today. Thank you.
Good point. Interesting that you say that the crews are okay, but that on the shore side we need to understand better what's going on. Nick, we heard about the question about digitalization, and I would be interested in hearing also your view on digitalization, and maybe also how much do you see that it's a challenge for a lawmaker to enter into this discussion or this time where we really do not really maybe know what we're talking about. What do you say, Nick?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I agree with the opinions of the panel that I've heard so far that digitization is an ambiguous term. I think that we have been digitizing in the shipping world for decades now. And it has increased exponentially just in the past 10 years. So when it comes to a regulatory standpoint, the Coast Guard has a charge to ensure the flow of commerce on the maritime transportation system, but it has to be done in a safe and secure manner. When I say secure, I mean security-wise. Safety has to include both the safety of the mariners, but also the safety of the surrounding community that the vessel is transiting on. So digitization creates great opportunity for efficiencies, both on the regulator side and the shipping side. But it also creates new risk vectors. We have several ways of dealing with risk vectors. We can either issue new laws and regulations to apply. We can use existing laws and regulations that already apply to that threat vector. For example, if a vessel is required to have charting on board, if it's an electronic chart, that's okay. And we use the existing authorities to dictate how we would inspect those electronic charting. We also have ways of producing what I would call flexible regulations that focus on a particular threat, and then look to industry to fix that threat. And a good example of that is the requirement for safety management systems, which we have codified in our regulations under 33 CFR Part 96. So, as I said, I think digitization is a good thing. I think we're moving in the right direction, and we have ways of dealing with how it comes along. But as I said, digitization has been coming along for decades now, but has really ramped up in the past 10 years, at least by my count. And so, at the rate in which we can actually issue a prescriptive regulation, by the time that got out the door and into the books, there's a good chance that whatever it was regulating has already been superseded. It's old news. So we need to look at more flexible ways of regulating certain aspects of digitization, which again I think we have the tools to do. We just need to sit down, identify what the risk is, and then start to work with industry to ensure that we meet the needs of both the safe and secure requirements of the MTS, Maritime Transportation System. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. How do you feel, just turning in my head what Eric said, that do you feel that there's a kind of a gap between how crews on board ships live through the idea or how they understand digitalization and how people on the shore side are doing? And are we, with the crews and the lawmaker, are we kind of on the same page? Do we talk about the same things? What's your kind of gut feeling? I know that it's really hard to pinpoint, but how do you feel about it?
I think training is a very important thing. We have certain training requirements. We follow STCW requirements. We also have our own training requirements that are in law and regulation. As well, again, you look at some of the requirements just out of SMS. Safety management systems require that you have properly trained individuals on board and that they know how to use those systems. If we find that someone doesn't know how to use a system, we can look further into that issue and start to discover if there's any discrepancies involved. So I think training is very important, and that the other side of that coin, though, is that we need to have regulators that understand the technology as well, or at least know how to ask the right questions on if the technology is operating as it is supposed to operate. So as I said, I think there's a lot of efficiency on both sides of the coin here. We just need to make sure that we're both speaking the same language and that we both understand what the technology does and how it affects the safety and security of that vessel.
I have to say that I fully agree with you. How do you, sorry to kind of stop here with Nick, but that since this is a good discussion, how do we ensure that equipment manufacturers and lawmakers get to the same page? What tools do we have there so that we would have a better understanding when it comes to future regulations? As you already said, the risk is great that if we are using 3 years to put together a rule for something, that it's really old when it comes to force. How should we do that in order to get to the results that we're looking at? Any comment from you, Nick?
Yeah, well, so Jakob and Erica, obviously, my answer is going to be United States centric. So if there's a different way from your points of view, then absolutely chime in, please. But from the United States point of view, we have different ways that we reach out to industry. One of the most prevalent is the Federal Advisory Commission Act, which is called a FACA, which is a group of industry individuals that are appointed to a chair in a group that advises the federal government. Those groups are available for comment. You can go and reach out to them and provide them comment, and they can provide comment to the U.S. Coast Guard. Other ways is to address the U.S. Coast Guard individually. We have had individual sit-down meetings with different industry groups, even with different industry members. So we are always open to comment and suggestion. The other way to do it is to lobby Congress. We have a very robust, continuous discussion with our committees, both on the Senate and the House side, and members of industry are more than welcome. In fact, they're constitutionally allowed to talk to their House and Congress members, House and Senate members. So that's another way to bring about change, and we in turn will then have discussions with the House and Senate.
Thank you, Nick. Jakob, do we have anything similar in Europe? Could CIMAC talk to the Commission?
Well, the Commission's doors are effectively always open, but we do have, perhaps not laid down in an act like that, but we have a quite an extensive consultation process before we legislate, where we ask, actually we start broader, so the citizen of Europe have a chance to answer some targeted questions on what we want to do or maybe want to achieve. And then we are obliged, and it's correctly so, to seek input from those that may be affected by the legislation we have in mind. And that, of course, includes industry. And industry organizations are, as Nick was pointing out, as being in the Commission, you're not deciding, but you're proposing. And therefore, you're also subject to a bit of lobbying, in the sense that industry organizations will visit the Commission and put their point of view forward. Now, I have seen a change in all of this, because it's not so much any longer you versus them. It is more, we respect our rules, but we are in the same boat, and we have to look at this together. And when we talk digitalization, it's risk-based much more. We're coming to a different type of regulating or how to find ways where everybody understands what it is, understand what can go wrong, and what we can do to avoid that from happening. In the old days, as you know better than me, the flag states would have a technical specialist flying out for the maiden voyage, and they would check all the systems on board and check the construction, and with class, with the shipyard, with the owner and the superintendents and all of that. In a way, that shouldn't change, but we need still to have the right people, and I agree with Nick there. It is one thing to do the nuts and bolts. Now we are in a little bit of a different ball game, so we have to have that skill. And actually, that goes for the legislator. But I'm coming back to Eric's point with the crew. Training, yes, but we must not forget the basic education. Do we have educational institutions that already know what the digitalization is when they graduate today? I'm not so sure. So it's also a challenge from that point of view. You can train on the job, yes, but I think in order to meet this future requirements, you probably have to build it in the education already. And for the next generation of seafarer, that might be an attraction, because it becomes more, Pac-Man type of work. But it needs to be put in a way in the curricula, which, well, I shouldn't say, because I don't know where they are today, but I can imagine if you don't really know what the digital solutions are today it's difficult to put it, how to educate for it in a curriculum. But I think certainly this is challenge. There is a lot of prospect, but there are also challenges on all aspects. You as manufacturer developing it, for regulators to understand it, for somebody to verify it. All of this has to find its form and way in a good way. What I can say is, and I guess you're alluding to that, Eero, there is a real need for coordination, cooperation, curiosity, and because that is the way you can build trust, and we have to do that a little bit together to understand together. I think myself, trials and tests, which the digital moving towards maybe autonomous in a way would need, and all parties needs to be involved to understand. We need to share information maybe more than we do today, and not hide behind data protection or IPRs or things. We need to share the information. We need to analyze it from our angles and understand what it is we are dealing with. And that as I see it, can only benefit this going forward. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. But I just need to kind of throw the question to you. Do you feel that there's training or competence issues in the maritime industry, both when it comes to ship side, but also the offices? Do you see any kind of signs on that, or something that is affecting the business today?
I think it's a really important point. I think some good comments have been made already, but I'll just go back to my earlier comment that it doesn't do anyone any good, and it can harm not only efficiency, but it can also be downright dangerous if we don't integrate these electronic systems together with a level of competency and training of the operators, and that includes the operators ashore as well. So I think that both elements of that are really important. I know that there is agreement now to proceed with a comprehensive review of the S2CW convention. I think that that's a wise move, and I think that that committee, the HTW subcommittee at IMO, I think is being tasked with something really important, and I know that this will be a significant component of that. I can say, if you look at the basic curriculum that would be required under the S2CW convention and maybe traditional norms of basic maritime skills, they're probably not sufficient for what we need to operate what we're putting in front of those crew members on the ships today, particularly the officers. And so we find that we have to do a lot of additional training, and in some cases building upon a fundamental skill set, which probably isn't the right baseline for fundamental skills today. And as those people transition ashore, as they often do in my company in particular, but I'm sure others, it's really important that they have the right foundation there and carry that over. And the people ashore have to be at least at a level of competency with systems that we're communicating around. So I do think that that element is really important too, so that we're getting the maximum out of these systems, but that also we're not leading ourselves to bad decision making, whether it's in real time, maybe in an operational sense, or maybe in a strategic sense. Because if you don't really understand those systems and where the sensitivities are that can lead to erroneous indications, whether it's on a screen or something that actually directly affects the operation of the ship, you end up in the wrong place pretty quickly.
Thank you, Bud. One thing that pops into my mind is Jakob already mentioned the word autonomy. I think that we will have autonomous systems. I don't per se see that in international traffic we will see unmanned drones, but we talked about the working environment on board, and we mentioned the STCW. How do we see a digital crew member in all of this? And how do we, I mean, it's the ship and the shoreside operations is already a system, but then on board we might have a system of systems where we have a machine and a human being part of the system. How do you see, Erik, a digital crew member, and how do we put that kind of into the context?
Well, that's also a big question. First and foremost, I'll just comment on what we just heard. What we have done in Denmark is to make our officers give them a bachelor degree, which really built a lot of stuff on top of the STCW requirements. So people have more skills, more general skills. Also because we want to prepare them to go on shore in the end when they take some years at sea, then go to shore, then go back to sea again. That's the whole idea about it. More or less like you also do in the Navy or Coast Guard. You go between office work, technical work on shore, and ship duty. And we try in the educational system to prepare people for that. But when we go and talk about autonomous systems, there's a huge debate. Should we upskill or downskill? I don't have an answer. But just to be a little provocative, the guy in front of the airplane, we hopefully will get back to flying in some time. It takes 18 months to train a pilot. Then he has papers to sit in the right seat of a commercial airliner. Then he needs to have some flying hours before he can advance into the left seat. Today in Denmark, it takes 7 years to make people with certificate as a senior officer. And then they still need to have a lot of years at sea to advance to full captain or chief engineer. So you can go two ways. For the time being, we have a very high educational level, which makes people very well suited to have this switch back and forth between the sea and the officers. But you could have the other way. You say you train straight for just going to sea and have a more airplane kind of operation, which will change totally the concept of operating ships. And that's a whole conference on its own, with having the ship as a system, having line maintenance, having a lot of more functions on shore when you maintain or operate the ship. So you cannot see one separated from the other. And I think we are going to have a number of years where we need to pile more knowledge on the seafarers. And then perhaps eventually we'll start designing systems that would do things totally different. And then again, you need to remember, now we have got MSC. MSC is the second largest container carrier in the world. Some of the companies I work with, they've got 1 or 2 ships. They've got a 1-man, 2-man shoreside operation. But they still have an advanced ship doing advanced tasks. They are in a totally different world. And lots of the training we're doing needs to address both sides of this coin. And I think that's really a challenge we also need to look at. And then just have another remark, which is back to some of the things we talked about in the beginning. I'm a SOLAS guy. I'm looking at the things that kill people instantaneously, to be a little provocative. But when I look at SOLAS only takes care of about 20% of the regulatory mass of a ship. All the other stuff is nowhere in IMO regulations. It's nowhere in flag state regulations. It's all developed, maintained, and surveyed by privately owned companies. You all know them. Your manufacturer, you all pay a lot of money to them, called classification societies. That's where the bulk of the regulatory, I would not call it legislation, but the bulk of the regulatory platform for today's ships, and especially for the automation part of it. That's not with us as flag states, that's with class. And we need to bring the whole concept of how we work and how we check classes and how classes work with each other and with your customers into this discussion. And I'll just change track, so I'll leave it to you again.
Thank you, Eric. The topic of classification societies would be an interesting to dive to, but that we don't have the time. One of my concerns is that in general, do we feel that from a regulator's perspective, that we are bringing forward products to the ships for the use of the ship owner that are falling completely outside all of the regulatory schemes that we're having, whether it's IMO or flag state or classification societies, and how will that impact safety? Do you feel that we already have something like that? Nick, do you recognize that there are something that digitalization is bringing forward that falls outside the current regulations, but still will be used on board?
Well, I think that the future will hold a lot of things that can be used on board the vessel that the Coast Guard doesn't have direct regulation over. And I think that's why we need to work on more flexible regulations. And again, I'll point to SMS and cybersecurity requirements. We require that SMS systems and also regulated facilities in the United States have cybersecurity included in either their SMS or in their facility security plans. And those requirements for facilities come out of the Maritime Security Transportation Act, which is our implementation of the ISPIS code. So in those cases, what we've done is we've reached out to industry and to other specialized groups such as National Institute of Science Technology to develop frameworks that could be used by industry to implement cybersecurity. They're non-prescriptive in the idea that we don't say that industry must use these guidelines. But what they do is they provide the ability for industry to have waypoints to understand how to meet the regulatory requirement. And that way industry can feel safe in the decisions they're making and the actions they're taking are going to meet the regulatory needs. So I would agree with you, Eero, that there's going to be products out there that don't fall within the regulatory framework. But if we have flexible regulatory frameworks that allow for these unregulated products to be used in a safe and efficient manner on board the vessels, and with knowledge of how it's used and how it affects the safety of the mariner and the environment and the free flow of commerce, then I think we can efficiently review those products and ensure that they are suitable without creating prescriptive regs for something that we may not even be able to anticipate exists.
Thank you, Nick. But you're representing a ship owner here in this discussion, and how do how do you feel? Do we talk to each other enough? I'm not talking about you and me, but that the equipment manufacturers and ship owners and the regulatory bodies or lawmakers. Do you think that we should do more, or how are we going into the future so that we really understand each other?
Well, I think there's a profound difference between and achievement. And so the volume of the conversation or quantity of it is nowhere near as important as the quality and the way that it occurs, generally speaking, in my view. And I think this is one area where that is true. And I'll give you one example. You mentioned the concept of autonomous shipping, which again is a phrase that I bristle at a little bit because I think it gets misused. I think it was marketed incorrectly to start with. I think most people don't view that as meaning we're not going to have any people on the ships anymore, but some people think that's what it is. Uh, I think that discussion largely started off without the kind of holistic type of discussion it really required between the manufacturers, the ship owners, and the governments. And it pretty much not a discussion driven by ship owners. We would all love to have better tools to use electronically to augment what we have right now. But as an example, you're just not hearing ship owners clamoring for, show me a way where I don't have to have these operators on the ship. But yet the perception of a lot of people is that this initiative is headed that way. I think if we'd started off on a different footing where all three elements of that tripartite discussion had been equal voices in the same room, I think we would have started off with discussing it in a different way, externally positioning it in a different way, and not wasting energy resisting one direction or another. Because if really at the end of the day what we're talking about is taking the things that we could do, like, for example, most of our cruise ships today are capable of operating berth to berth without somebody touching the controls, or, or being on the bridge if it weren't legally required. But that doesn't mean we're going to do it. And I think those are the kind of thoughts that we need to have. Aviation's pretty much the same way. A lot of people don't realize that on a lot of modern aircraft, the pilot really doesn't have to touch anything, but we kind of hope he does, and we expect that. So I think those more robust discussions that include all three elements in the same room at the same time lead ultimately to better initiatives that are actually marketed better. And I don't mean that in the commercial sense, but are externalized and socialized better, so that they gain broader acceptance. So I think we could do certainly more of higher quality interaction. This type of interaction, I think, is an excellent one to have. But I'd like to see more and more of that. And hopefully in the near future, when we're back to IMO and physically in the building and can have the kind of discussions both in the margins and the working groups, which unfortunately have been a casualty of COVID lately, we'll have better processes again as we all deal with this. And this one other comment I'd like to make, and I've heard others touch on it here, I think it's really important, particularly with evolving technology, where we don't try to be over prescriptive as regulators. And I had a long career as a regulator before I went to the private sector, and I've worn both hats. But if you really try to define freeze in time together with the process lead time it takes to get something out on the streets in an evolving technological environment, your regulation is going to be obsolete pretty much by the time it hits the street, probably. And you're going to end up with the situation we did. I'll just give a good example of lifeboats. Why is a lifeboat limited to 150 people? Nobody even remembers why that is. It's just they always had been. But yet in the meantime, we've moved on for pretty good reasons to larger and larger lifeboats on cruise ships. So, and that's a very slowly evolving technological space. This is as rapidly evolving as you could imagine. So I think for us to be successful in safely, reliably bringing these technologies to bear to improve the way we really operate the ships in all regards and make us all better, it really needs to be a dynamic or outcome-based, goal-based sort of regulatory paradigm that's there to meet that technology.
Thank you very much, Bud, and thank you everyone so much. We are running out of time. I would say that the conclusion is that there's a lot of opportunities waiting to be unlocked when it comes to digitalization. And as Bud said towards the end, the more we talk to each other, the better it will be going into the future. So thank you so much from my side. I would have loved to continue this discussion for 1 more hour or so, and I hope that we can continue this discussion even later at some other forum. Thank you so much. Thank you.